Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Keeping Up with Papa Life After Work, where we find out how one man manages to keep himself busy, physically active, and mentally engaged after retirement with projects. Today's project? Well, we add a lean-to our existing pole barn to give ourselves just a little more parking space. Check it out. When Welcome back. Hey, and as previously mentioned, we've added a lean-to extension to the old pole barn. Now, the original pole barn was 30 feet by 30 feet. The new extension adds 10 feet in width and another 30 feet in depth. Now, as a neighbor of mine is kind of fond of telling me, well, I have way too many toys, and he's probably right. But you know what? I'm retired. I didn't work the last 50 years nonstop to sit around twiddling my thumbs in my golden years and not do anything with my time. So I like my toys, and I'm not planning on getting rid of any of them anytime soon. Meaning, I needed a little more space. Enter the lean-to idea. Now, if you think about it, there's not really a whole lot to one of these from a material standpoint. I mean, you've got poles, which are just 6x6 treated pine sourced from Lowe's. You've got some concrete down the bottom for footers. Then you've got trusses. Now the trusses are metal and they're manufactured at a place about 65 miles from here, so they're fairly local. You've got rafters. Rafters are just 2x6s, treated pine again, from Lowe's. And then you've got metal. And that metal was manufactured also about 65 miles away. So from a material standpoint, there's not a whole lot there. And it's really not that difficult of an assembly if you have at least a little bit of construction knowledge. I mean, it's kind of like, when you were a kid and you had an erector set. I used to love my erector set. I wonder if they still make those. Well, when it was finished, the lean-to added enough room for me to park all of my toys under one roof, or perhaps I guess you'd say two. And it freed up a bay in my garage for my wife's car, and that was an added bonus. And you know what? It really was not all that expensive. I mean, first I went out for kit quotes from companies that do this thing for a living, and they came back at $3,600 for materials delivered here to the house. I started thinking that's kind of expensive. I mean, the 30 by 30 you see off to my left here, that was only $3,800 materials about 8 years ago. So I decided to do a little ciphering. I sketched out a design and made a materials list, and I shopped. By sourcing materials on my own, the end cost dropped from $3,600 down to $1,800 in materials, half the original cost. That made it much more affordable. Let's see how I built it. After I got the trusses here, I made the mistake of laying them on the ground. Then we had a big rainstorm. And, well, they got covered with sand. It bounced up on them. So I've rinsed them all off. I've come up with this ingenious method of setting them up off the ground where I can paint them, which basically is just a bolt here that slipped it over and is holding it in place. Fell off the first few times. I kind of got it figured out, hopefully, where it's not going to fall on my foot. But a little wipe down here just to get a little extra sand off, and then I'm going to paint them red. I took a piece of barn red roofing material I had kept around and to ace, and I had them match the paint color for something that's appropriate for metal. So it's going to be a little different color when it dries, but this is what it's going to look like. Oh yeah. It's gonna take 2 coats. Cover up that black. Be nice if I could spray it, but boy, that's just not gonna be practical. I think I'm gonna be here a while. And good morning. Here are our trusses. First coat of barn red paint in place. The second one over here fell off the little mount, so I just set it up and painting it on the ground. Third and fourth, I've got to put a second coat on now this morning, and then after that we will be ready to hang them. I may be buying the posts this afternoon. Sunday afternoon, and some of the family came over, guys, to give me a hand with these poles to get ready for the extension, the lean-to on the pole barn. The first thing that had to happen, I should have filmed a lot of that, but I didn't do it. First thing was we had to actually take a tree down, this little oak tree, little water oak. It was going to be a problem. It really wasn't much of a problem right now, but it was leaning right over this corner, and eventually it was going to be a problem. So we decided to go ahead and remove that. That only took about 10 minutes. Dropped it, and I just now finished cleaning up around it. Then the poles went in. So this was a lot of thought exactly on how to go about doing this. We ended up, should I cut the poles and put them in at the right length, or should I cut them after? Well, we decided to cut them after, and they are in their correct spot right now based on 10 foot and 1/4 inch dimension from one end of this truss to the other. What I don't know is when those are mounted on the existing poles, and you can see up top here I have one bolt in place, exactly where that's going to hit over here on this pole. So I can't cut it off in advance. So what I'm going to do, I am going to go ahead and set these in concrete. They're exactly where they need to be right now, or they're very close. I'm going to double check all the dimensions, set them in concrete, and then test dry fit one of these on each end. Basically, I'll drop one in here, kind of get it as snug as I can, get a mark on this pole over here for where to cut it off, and then cut this one off. And then I'll end up doing the same thing over here on the other end, on this farthest away pole, and then draw a line after I've cut that pole over to these poles, these 2 poles, and cut those off. Then we'll be able to set the trusses in place. I think that's going to work. It's going to work really well. Next step, concrete. Well, I came out here first thing this morning, and I checked plumb on all of the poles, and I double checked my distances from pole A to pole B and all my squares in between. Everything is really perfect. I had to make some minor tweaks, and that was it. So, time to drop concrete in place. Now let's talk a little bit about concrete in an application like this. County most definitely wants you to do it, and it does give you a lot of lateral strength back and forth. But this is just a pole barn. It's open. There's no sides to it. The only uplift that will occur if we have a hurricane is it'll come in underneath and it'll just basically tear the tin off. These poles are super heavy. There's really no chance at all that a big wind is going to pick the poles up out of the ground. But the concrete will stop us from getting a little shifting to the left or right or backwards and forward. So that's why we put concrete in the holes. Let's get started. As you can see, I'm going to dry pour this. Now, dry pouring works really well in an application like this. You just basically dump in the concrete around the pole and wet her in good, and 24 hours later, you've got a nice concrete base. With the first bag of concrete in, I'm going to grab my level and just double check plumb. At this point I can make minor adjustment. Yeah, we look good there. We look good there. All right. I'm gonna do all 4 poles. Then come back with 1 bag, and then come back with a second bag and split it 50-50 between the poles, and then we'll water it in. Concrete's all in place. All 4 poles. Everything looks good. I'm going to double check for plumb, and then we'll start watering in. Each hole will get hit multiple times. Several times probably throughout the day would be ideal. Along this edge, I had brought in a lot of dirt and tapered it up to protect the slab and planted grass. Well, the grass didn't take well, but at this point it has come off anyway, because where I'm standing right now is the new flooring for the barn extension. So tractor came in here today. You can see the ledge here where I've cut it out. So I took the tractor and took all this dirt and actually needed it in the driveway. So that worked out really well. And I have mostly flat section here. I've got some pavers that I'm probably going to put along this edge to protect the slab on the actual main pole barn. So making progress. That step is pretty much done.
Get the hammer and knock the bolts in.
Pay the wind, Tommy.
All right.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get the hammer. Tries, the 4th one's perfect.
That one actually did do pretty good.
Oh, it looks great from this
Yeah,
side.
y'all didn't even let me break it in the first time, you know? Good thing you weren't recording on the first one. Sorry, Mike, I know.
I mean, it's not been lifted, mudded. Guarantee all you know is
Fantastic. There you go, perfect time. It's the final countdown. Put up. There we go. Pull it out. I'll put you in there after pop.
I picked up all the rafters from Lowe's a few days back, and a couple of the kids made the mistake of coming over yesterday, so I harnessed them and we stuck the rafters up real fast. Now, none of them are screwed in place, and they're a little bit, not quite, the gaps aren't closed up between them. So This morning it's time to screw them in and also to close those gaps first. Tapped it till it quit moving, it's hit. All right, 4 screws done there. 7 times, I can't do the math, a lot more screws left. All right, so on and so forth. Probably take me an hour to finish it up. You may be wondering just how I get the rafters squared off, because these were too long by a couple of inches when I put them up. So it's done with strings and a level to get good marks. You can see here that we've got, if you look at the old rafters down there, and you line all this up, I have a nice straight cut on this end, and it matches perfectly the cut on the old rafters. So the question becomes, how did I do that? Well, as I said, done with strings. But how do you use a string to do that? Well, first we start off, how do we get these poles square? This pole in particular to the other poles. And this is how that was done. Also with a string. So, sorry for the shaky here, but so a string went on the, a foot up on the far pole down there and around the corner, and it wrapped around. It came all the way down past this one and to, as we were hanging or setting this pole, to this one. So we pulled that string tight and then slowly moved it over to where we had a good match, where it was just barely touching the second pole here on the inside. And that became our mark for where this pole would sit. And we knew we had a nice straight line between pole 1, pole 2, and pole 3. Little finagling after that, but it worked out perfectly. So now we have the same issue on this side. How do we get these cut off straight? Well, we're back to the strings and using a line setup. So what I've done here is I've taken 3 of these rafters, pin my string to the 3rd rafter, and use that as a guideline to go from rafter 1, 2, and 3. And the problem here is that they're not all cut the same. So one's a little shorter than the other. So in addition to that, I got the best sight line I could on it. Then I used a tape measure on these old trusses and the new trusses to get a distance on the truss and kind of averaged it out. And knowing that this pole was square, I checked those numbers over here as well. And I've come up with something I think is exactly perfect to give me a straight cut down it. Once this is done, which this part is done, I now get out a square and a pencil and a short level, which is over there, and use that for plumb, and I'll put marks on the boards and then cut them. So as I've mentioned before, this isn't finished carpentry. It's, you know, it's rough carpentry essentially. It's just a barn, but I still want to be fairly accurate. And for me, fairly accurate is maybe 1/8 of an inch. The other guys, they didn't follow that rule. Those cuts are all really rough. In my case, you get a nice mark here. Make it nice and square and pretty when we're done. Well, the rafters are all cut. Got nice straight lines, look really good. Tin is ready. Tomorrow, midday, I'll run over and pick that up. That is something I should be able to put up by myself. I've done it before. So maybe tomorrow afternoon, we'll get tin on top. We'll see. Time to put the tin on the roof. So I had about a 65-mile one-way trip today. Run over and pick it up. Pre-ordered it last week. And it's 12 feet long, and my trailer is 12 feet, about half an inch, and it still didn't quite fit just right. So ended up dropping it back end down. I've got chains that hold it in place so I can do that. Tied off some markers to it. Strapped it down good so it wouldn't go anywhere. And we're here, so we're going to pull the all the straps off and the paper, or the covers, see what we've got. Okay, so here's what we have. There are a number of different patterns you can order, and I matched the pattern that's up there exactly, which is 4 little sections and 4 different sets of ribs, actually 5 major ribs on there. So what you see here on this end is that we have a large overlap, and over there we have a small overlap. And the way they put it on this this existing roof right now, which I want to match identically, is the short overlap is on this end, and they started on this end. They laid that one first, and then they overlapped it with this larger end next. So it'll make sense when you see it. So that's what I've got to do. Also, we're at a kind of a critical point right now where if I get out of alignment at all right now, it's really going to show up at the other end. So I have to take my time to make sure I have it squared perfectly. Let's get started. Well, this absolutely is something you can do by yourself. I have done it by myself before. 2 people would be a lot easier, but there's just one of me. So I'll struggle a little bit, but I'll get it done, and we'll see if I slip and do something foolish. Hope not. Work. Go get the ladder. So now, assuming that I have all my dimensions correct, I'm just going to kind of duplicate what's over there with how much overhang I have this way and how much overhang I have this way. So I'm going to double check both of those, and then set this first one up, see how it looks. And I think I'll slip 2 or 3 more up there, maybe anchor this in 2 spots that I can go back and easily undo it, and then see how they're laying, and you know if they're nice and even or not as I move my way down. Beautiful. I have a nice straight line on my board cuts, and kind of hard to see from here, but I've got an alignment on that sheet of tin up top that works well with this one, and so I've got that lined up. Now I just need to line up my overhang, which up there is right at 3 inches. That's pretty darn close. I'll pop 2 screws in there. One thing I would like to mention, the manufacturer excuse me, the original installers for the other barn, they put the screws on the flat. You're not supposed to put the screws on the flat. You're supposed to put the screws on the ribs. It just makes better sense for long-term, long life of the seal. There's not as much water coming down and hitting as when you have water running down. It's going to hit more on the screws if they're in the flat. However, this is just a pole barn, and I'm just going to match what's up there already. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Plus, they put actually two in on each flat area. So that's actually a good idea. It's extra strength. Okay, so I'm going to toss up a few more pieces and just overlap them to make sure they look good, and then unoverlap them and scoot them out of the way. And I think we're doing really well. I'm happy with this. It's going to turn out great. You can see here now that I've dried fit 3 of these panels, and ever so slightly I was starting to get out from 3 inches at the far end. So I made adjustments that I could, but you actually can torque these just a little bit to make up for that. I'm running under the assumption I'm square. When I get down to the other end, I'll have just the right amount of overhang. So I'm going to go ahead and lock down each panel, and then I will torque as I go to hold that 3-inch dimension. And I may torque it a little left, torque it a little bit to the right, depending on which way it needs it. From here on out, it gets tedious. Just start putting in screws. These are self-tapping. They work great when you don't screw it up. Definitely want to get my neck out of the way, or the tin out of the way of my neck. I don't want to rear back there and cut myself. Adds an extra step. I don't think the pros do that, but I'm not a pro. All right, it's gonna be 2, 4, 6, 8. 1, 2, 3, 6, 56 screws per panel. I'm gonna be here a while. One thing about the toss-up method, and I guess maybe doing it by yourself, is that they may not want to stay up there, and this one didn't. Now, fortunately, I had stepped forward when it came back down. It didn't hit me, it went over my head. But you can just imagine if that thing had caught me on the head or in the throat, the amount of damage. I don't think I'd be filming this right now. So anyway, I'll get a board down and underneath that and a hammer and straighten it out. But yes, be careful with things like that. This is a potentially dangerous job. So this is either going to work really well or it's going to be a dismal failure. I don't know, there might be an in-between somewhere, but I'm thinking a couple of boards, this type of a hammer, a dead blow hammer. See how well we can straighten that out. Well, that's definitely better. It's a long way from factory. And I've learned something here. So you see this joint overlap on the old one. Well, apparently they punch these over a little bit, and instead of a nice clean overlap, and this one over here is pretty clean, this one's off to the left. And they did that a lot, and so it's ended up with me being off to the right a little bit. You can see here this alignment is over in here instead of here. So I'm now having to cheat these back to the left as I go about 1/4 inch. And they got pretty far off actually, and so now I have moved it back quite a bit. It looks a lot better. So that's the one thing I learned about this process. Check the work of the people in front of you. All right, so another thing I've learned is I like to have straight lines. So I use a straight edge and then a black magic marker on every place the screw is going to go. You'll never be able to see that from the ground, and eventually will wash off anyway. Give me a nice straight edge. And also, you know, earlier I had said I'm using a hammer to hammer these screws in a little bit first. I started thinking that's way too much work. So instead, what I figured out, which is pretty obvious, is load your screw in, line it up, and then use 2 hands on the drill. And one hand steadies, the other hand puts pressure. And that just works really, really well when you don't drop the screw. Speeds it up quite a bit. Yeah, I'm going to leave that in, because I do that a lot. Final panel is up. I ended up short on screws. I would guess 50 or 60. So I just kind of put them all up there, and I'll climb up top later and fill in the holes. You know, I strategically left spots that I can feel comfortable enough. If I have a wind, it's not going to cause a problem. All right, as you can see, the lean-to is completely finished. All my toys are tucked away and sleeping contentedly. Hey, thanks again for watching, and please remember to like and share and subscribe. I'll see you next time on Keeping Up with Papa, Life After Work. Papa out.